Welcome to The Victory Show.
Hey, Victors, welcome to this episode of The Victory Show. If this is your first time joining us, I'm Travis Cody, best-selling author of 19 books and the creator of Bestseller by Design. I've had the privilege of helping hundreds of business consultants, founders, entrepreneurs write and publish their own best-selling books. And through that journey, I've discovered a really fascinating pattern. Most businesses really struggle to break past that 7 figures per year in revenue. So on this show, I sit down with some of the world's most successful founders, CEOs, leaders, and business owners to uncover the strategies they use to scale way past that mark so you can do the same. Get ready for some deep insights and actionable takeaways that you can implement in your life and your business starting now. Today's guest is reshaping how we think about land, legacy, and the built environment around us. Will Bilehartz, I hope I'm saying that right. It's a good one. It's German. Is a real estate developer, investor, designer, and executive whose work lives at the intersection of regenerative business, story-driven design, and triple bottom line real estate investment. He's founded and led multiple companies and projects that go far beyond just profit, integrating conservation, community, and sustainability into every square foot. Will and his companies specialize in commercial mixed use and conservation development with a signature approach rooted in a deep respect for place, ecology, and long-term impact. From visionary architecture to regenerative economics, his work is a blueprint for how real estate can be both profitable and profoundly purposeful. So, Will, thanks for taking time out of your day to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
You don't really hear that whole concept of purposeful when it comes to real estate. I think, unfortunately, in our world today, people think real estate and they go Donald Trump, which is a slightly different type of real estate. So let's talk a little bit about how did you like your background is so unique in coming into the regenerative purpose. So take me back to where you grew up as a kid, because I think people love to hear about your background.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's nice to be here. And yeah, I mean, when I started doing regenerative land management, I was like 9 years old. So this was kind of like just learning through trial and error at that point as a kid. And my family bought a ranch outside of Austin, Texas, and we started grazing American bison on the property. We started growing our own food. And so I got a real hands-on approach of like, what does it actually mean to grow your own food? A lot of people think it just shows up at the grocery store, but it takes a lot of work before then. And so I got a unique aspect or lens into agriculture at that age. We were also using solar panels, water, gray water systems, rain harvesting, things like
You're
that.
using solar before any people were even really talking about what solar was.
Yeah, this was in the 90s in Texas. So most of my friends at that age were kind of thinking we were quite weird. Um, but it really gave me a lens into land development and land management at scale, and how to kind of think about land differently and how to work with the natural elements that
So
you're.
how old were you when you moved to that place?
I was about 9 years old.
So you had an experience of non-land management and I guess typical American living, and then to go off like essentially off grid.
Yeah.
How was that
Yeah.
as a kid? Was that pretty exciting for you?
It was both exciting. It was a great adventure because we had this massive, land that I could roam around on and shoot bows and arrows and just kind of be wild. And it was also challenging because, unlike most of my peers at that time, I was being asked to do basically manual labor, which, obviously a couple generations ago, that was quite common to have a child workforce on the farm. But it was challenging in the sense that not many of my peers understood what it was that I did every day. And so, yeah, I learned a lot about hard work and discipline and, like what time the chickens need to go in the coop in order for the coyotes not to get them. Real life lessons that I take with me now. So,
I gotta ask because we were talking. I grew up on a farm, and we had cows. We run cows, so it was never pets, right? There was always food.
yeah.
But about every 15 years, you would get an unusual one that was super friendly and it would
hmm
follow you around. I'm just curious, did you ever have a pet bison?
I never had a pet bison, although my father treated them like sheep. He would herd them around very eloquently. They never quite responded to me in the same way. I've always had a love-hate relationship with them. They're
Well,
not
when
like,
you're 9, the bison's the size of a house.
Yeah, they're quite large animals, and they're still quite wild too.
Yeah.
So, the fences that we would build from them, oftentimes they would just pick them up and kind of move them wherever they wanted the grass that they wanted. So.
All right. So how do you go from essentially homesteading to turning this into a, multi-million dollar sort of business and empire and development and regenerative design and architecture?
Well, I always wanted to be an architect from a young age. That was like something I was always drawing like house plans. I was fascinated. I got one of those like green, stencil kits when I
Yeah.
was a kid and just started like designing my house. And I guess, we were always doing that as a family. We were building a house, we were developing land. And so I just started to think about the world in boxes, but more interesting boxes. Um, and my family started a zipline canopy tour in 2005, and we happened to be the first in the continental United States. And so
Wow.
when that industry took off in the preceding decade, and there were like 600 of these things built across the US, I helped build about 20, 25 of those
Wow.
with a variety of different companies that I worked with and for at that time. But there was an emerging industry that I was able to take advantage of and kind of sit at the forefront of and had a lot of real hands-on practical information, both from the operations, the business development side, but also from the risk management and kind of liability side, as well as the construction implementation. And that led me for many years on that journey with the zipline tour industry and high angle ropes course design and development. And that got me working with a lot of big ski resorts and youth group camps and things that were doing a lot of summer activities
Yeah.
with, sometimes hundreds or thousands of people and sometimes on, multiple square miles of a mountaintop. Um, and I really started to like master planning. Like I loved the looking down on, whatever the acreage of the property was and designing how we would transport guests to these unique experiences in nature. And that led me to think about, well, what else could we put in the trees or what else could we be designing that would be really impactful for people? And so I started a treehouse design and construction company. I had a background in construction and land development, and we started building, high-end luxury tree houses for people. And that was right about the time that Airbnb got started or really took off. And so that led to an emergence of kind of bespoke, unique rental, like this short-term rental or this whole vector of the hospitality industry that was, untapped up until that point.
Uh,
Um,
was there one specific instance where you were kind of like looking at a tree going, if I built like a luxury tree house, that would be really cool. Did it start with one project and went from there, or was it just because you were in the industry, you're one, I bet these things would work well.
It wasn't particularly one tree, but it was the idea of creating, like an Ewok village, this idea that we could create something that was just totally out of this world and people could stay there. And we did build one on our property in 2006 on the zipline tour, like beside the zipline tour where guests could stay overnight. And that was by request. Like all of the guests were just like, leave us up here, we'll sleep in a sleeping bag. And that treehouse ended up getting covered on the New York Times travel section, front page, like two-page spread. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, this could really be something. There's a myth or a zeitgeist behind this. And then, I started looking at, well, what are the investment models in real estate? How do you actually fund these projects? What's the capital sources that are needed? And I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to have some good early years. I actually didn't go to college, so I was kind of in the workforce much before many of my peers.
Hmm.
And so I was able to kind of build up some income and start investing in these types of projects myself.
Wow. So let's talk about a little bit about that then. You want to go as an architect. You want to be an architect as you go in, and you just sort of naturally develop these skills as you go along. So, like, what were the challenges because it sounds like this started off as a passion project and it's something you love to do. Like, was there a moment where you had to take a step back and go, oh man, like, this is actual a real business and I need to start having a team and we need to start having systems in place?
Yeah, that was probably sometime in 2015, 2016. I actually, at that time, decided to move to California for a variety of reasons. And I co-opted my mom, who's a Harvard MBA and had always been a great resource as an advisor to me over the many years. She was the first one who ever taught me what a performa was. And I was like, Mom, I want to raise some capital and do some development projects. Can you help me with the development model? And she did that. And that was kind of the beginning of formulating a team around me, besides it just being like, a band of roving treehouse builders that would build anywhere in the world, which was very romantic and fun. I mean, we built in Mexico and Thailand and all these other places. But I was like, okay, I want to make this a business. I think this can actually be something. So that was around 2015, 2016.
Wow. And how did you go about doing that? Like, what did that first year look like from you, kind of going from, I guess, essentially just a solopreneur with a small team to then actually bringing in the structure?
Well, I looked at, how was I going to develop real estate? I learned a lot about legal structures and tax structures and how to kind of put together special purpose vehicles or real estate investment vehicles that were unique and had their own kind of economics. And yeah, brought in some partners in San Francisco because I moved to the Bay Area. There were a lot of people there that I could learn from. I got a lot of mentorship and an advisor pool that kind of helped me think through how to take just a nascent, treehouse idea and make it a full-scale real estate idea. And then we had some great clients too that came across our desk that were like, we have a resort operating business and we want you to come in and help us boost our revenue by building out a treehouse.
Hmm.
One of those most notably was in Mexico, called Playa Viva. They've gone on to be a very successful resort in kind of the ecotourism and regenerative travel space. Um,
What's the biggest treehouse you guys have built?
Single treehouse somewhere between 700, probably like 700 to 800 square feet total. So, I mean, not a small treehouse by any
Yeah,
means.
that's bigger than my apartment in LA.
Exactly. Yeah, bigger than some Soho lofts too.
And have you had resorts where you've built like what you were saying, like a real Ewok village where there's like tree houses that kind of connect?
Yeah, we've done a lot of connecting tree houses. A lot of the ones that have been more Ewok style have been more for private residence owners. We still haven't finalized the like Ewok Redwood Forest Village idea. That's still something that's in the wings.
You've got plans drawn up though, don't you?
Oh yeah, all kinds of plans. Yeah.
So like this whole idea, so what I find fascinating about this is that like the regenerative space, from my experience of where I'm seeing, really didn't feel like it started picking up steam until 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and you've been doing this for decades already. So what have been some of the, like, from your viewpoint, some of the exciting advancements in the regenerative architecture and development space over this last, decade?
Well, I think, much like how the zipline tour industry emerged quite quickly, the regenerative word and kind of the nomenclature has arrived on the scene, and now it's kind of pushing its own narrative and arc. And one of the things, whenever a new industry or a new kind of way of seeing the world happens, is there's a lot of new principles that get applied. And I always like principles that it reinforce other growth or other kind of alpha or other things that are good for business that are not negative. And I think that's a big, maybe stumbling block of the sustainability movement was it was like, let's do less bad. And like, that's not really an end all. Like, that's a zero sum game that just never goes anywhere versus
I've
let's
never heard
create,
it explained that way before, but that is such a great summary of what sort of the push has been for a while, right? Just do
yeah.
less bad. You're like, why don't we do more better?
Right. Why don't we do more good in the world? And so, and real estate is such a location-centric, location-driven business anyways, that to try to remove yourself from the location isn't really smart anyways. Like you have a community, you have a jurisdiction that overlays, you have environmental, whether it's regulatory environmental things or just environmental constraints, like how much water or square footage or what's the slope of the land. So it's such an environmentally driven business that the regenerative principles make a lot of sense there, even more so than maybe in some of the more heady businesses like importing or exporting or manufacturing. Like there are things that can happen in those businesses to make them more regenerative. But I feel like real estate is one that touches so many vectors of people's life that it's a really good place to start with regenerative principles.
So you've done a lot of your architecture, you've done a lot of the tree houses, and you now also have a development fund as well, correct?
Yeah, I started Anura Capital 2 years ago, and it was largely looking at there was a missing void in the field or in the space. There were a lot of projects that needed funding that had really good kind of base values or base economics for their project site. And then there were a lot of funders that were looking for impact real or impact investing, but there was nothing in real estate. Like your options were like multifamily, storage units, industrial, office. And it really wasn't very inspiring. Like the stuff that was, quote, green was like, we put solar panels on the building, and that's about all we could do. And I'm kind of in a centrist view of like development is coming whether we want it to or not. The only thing
Mhm.
we can do is guide how the development impacts our communities and our real estate and our own private holdings. If you're a real estate holder and you own a home somewhere, your community is going to change. And you can be a voice in that change and be a co-participant in it, or you can kind of stick your head in the sand. And so I've taken the approach that, well, let's try to apply regenerative principles to it instead of just letting it run its course.
So what are some of the core principles then that you would be teaching? Let's say, I don't know, I grew up in a small town in Utah. It's growing fast because a lot of people are retiring from California and selling their houses for a lot and going up there and buying 10 acres, going like, oh my God, I have all this land. So what are some of the principles that you could teach to a community like that to like help them, I guess, grow in a congruent way?
Well, one of them would be that you have to work with what's there underlying, right? And like elevate what the best parts of that place are. And I think a lot of development oftentimes just looks at like, well, what is the best return on investment, but maybe not what makes sense in this place. And if we look back 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, looking at Europe, for example, when they were building pre-industrial revolution, they were building things that, even before heating and cooling was really a thing, they were building structures and developments that matched the community that they were embedded within. So whenever I talk to a developer or a client, or when we're looking at projects, we really look at how does this fit in the place? And so there's a lot of journeying or kind of like discovery around what is this place and what is appropriate, what's site appropriate here.
So how does that show up when you guys are designing tree houses for a resort?
Well, I mean, perfect example. Every tree is different. So, you're not going to build the same tree house in this tree as you might that tree. Or you have an ecosystem and it has a subset of kind of constraints or principles like the tropics, for example. The tropics are a very different climate, and it makes sense when you think about it. It's hot there, it's steamy or muggy. Airflow is a big part of how buildings get designed in the tropics. You need that airflow. Um, and similarly, if you're in an Arctic or like an alpine climate where you have a lot of snow load, you might do very different things there. You obviously maybe have been to a ski resort and they have the mud room, right? The mud room was an architectural, necessity because you had to take off all the mucky gear that you needed to, get through the snow.
No, that's funny. So looking forward for where you guys at. So, you start this 2015-ish when you start building your team, you're 10 years into it. What does the next 5 to 10 years look like? Not just for your company, but what would you hope that it looks like for the regenerative space as a whole?
Well, one of the things that we've been iterating on and developing on for many years at Artistry, which was the original design build firm, but then has become a real estate development firm, is we've realized that the built environment is largely being built pretty poorly. like from a just base standpoint, like construction waste, kind of building performance,
You mean
toxicity.
guys just building for profit have a tendency to cut corners and do things cheaply?
That is the modus operandi for capitalism largely right now. And we have an aging building, home residential infrastructure and all buildings really that are coming to their natural end of life cycle. Like whether it's a depreciation schedule or whether it's the physical studs in the wall, they've been in that wall for 50, 100, 20 years, however long it is. And we've started building homes for cheaper and cheaper over the years, for
Yeah.
less and less time as well. Like we used to build homes for 100 years or 150 years. Now we're building them for 20, right? Of course.
I live in Las Vegas, and I had a friend who bought a brand new custom built house, and within 3 years, like all the corners, it was like had a half-inch separation because the foundation wasn't built correctly, so the house was settling.
Yeah.
It's two
Yeah, and
years
that's
into it.
that's happening all over the place. So
It's
I've been
crazy.
looking at real estate development. What's the largest factor that we can reduce kind of the consumption or increase the value to the owners? And we've started getting into prefabrication. So we were always prefabricating elements when we were doing the zipline tours. We were prefabbing stuff when we were doing the tree houses. And so we've decided that we're going to launch a prefabricated line of homes that'll actually address not just the commercial hotel resort lodging space, but also be applicable to residences where people
Wow.
can build non-toxic, more affordable, quicker because you don't have to do all the on-site construction. It'll also have fire-resistant materials, which are huge for, a big portion of the West. We're dealing with massive raging fires now that didn't exist maybe 20, 30 years ago. And so we're doing mold resistant, fire resistant, and no VOC buildings, which when you really think about it, you spend most of your time indoors. Why would you
Yeah.
put yourself in a box that's either toxic for you or the environment? Um, so that's where one of the vectors of the company is going now. We're putting a lot of energy into this new launch that'll be coming in 2026. The company is called Anjo. It'll be Anjo Prefab Homes.
Wow. Man, you got your hands on a lot of pies. All right. So if somebody's listening to this and they're interested in what you're doing, what are the ways they get a hold of you? What are your companies and websites and how to, who would go where?
Yeah. Well, so if there was somebody that wanted maybe a landowner that wants to develop a boutique hotel or a resort or something that's kind of commercial facing and needs kind of master planning, development services, that would be artistry. If you're somebody who's more of like an investor looking to invest into this type of regenerative economy or sustainable real estate type developments, that would be Anura Capital. And you can find me at either will@anura.earth or will@artistryhome.com. And artistry
Anura
is spelled with,
Anura.earth.
yeah,
And then the other one was artistry.com.
home.com.
I
Yeah.
love it. Well, what are the big projects you guys are working on right now that's got you most excited?
Well, one of them on the real estate development side is we've found a project in Montana that's outside of Missoula area that was originally designed and built by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1905.
What? The
And
whole community?
well, so he designed an entire community that was supposed to be like a back to nature community for Chicago professors and white collar people
No
to
way.
basically buy an agrarian parcel. Every home would get a 10-acre apple orchard as a portion of it. And the apples would be in like a cooperative share where they would
Sure.
get sold off and you would get dividends from your apple orchard. And for a variety of reasons, the train tracks moved further south in the early 1900s.
Oh
So that
no.
development never reached its full potential, but he built a couple homes on this site. And I came across this project a couple of years ago, and that was actually one of the reasons to form Anura was like, okay, let's create a development, a hotel model that can do land conservation. And so that's super exciting. It's called Como Orchard. We're currently fundraising for that project right now. And it'll be like a 50, 60 key hotel, five-star resort hotel embedded within a Frank Lloyd Wright inspired project.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have you back on here in a few years so we can see what some of these projects are.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here today. This is super exciting to me.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I'm really appreciative to be here.